Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending upon where you're located in your time zone. And welcome to this week's Abacus Next Free Training Tuesdays webinar. This week, we're going to be focusing on new file intake management within Amicus Attorney at a high level. My name is Darren Juby, and I'm a product trainer here at Abacus Next, and my focal point is the Amicus Attorney product line. Now, as always, if anyone has any questions at all during today's session, please do feel free to submit them using the questions feature here in GoToMeeting. And time permitting, we will answer them as we go along or towards the end of the session. And in the event that we do run out of time, please do provide your contact information as well, and I'll be happy to follow up accordingly to provide you with the information that you seek. And as well, if anybody cannot see my Free Training Tuesdays new file intake management slide here or cannot hear me, please do let me know through the chat feature here in GoToMeeting. If I don't see anything suggesting otherwise, then from there we will proceed accordingly. Okay, so I'm guessing everybody can see and hear me A-okay. So with that being said, we have a lot of information to cover over the course of the next hour. So without further ado, let us begin by focusing on the agenda of what we're going to talk about and demonstrate. We're going to talk about and demonstrate customizing and designing new file intake forms. We're going to do an overview of that. And in doing so, we'll talk about and demonstrate completing an intake form. We'll differentiate between basic pages and file type specific pages. We'll talk about actions on your new file intake forms, as well as being able to print those intake forms. Then we'll move along to managing pages in new file intake forms, and in that particular section, we will focus on new file intake management dialog itself. We'll talk about creating a blank new page. We'll talk about creating a new page based upon an existing one. We'll also focus upon how you can go about editing an existing page, how you can change the page name or file type assignments of an existing page, how you can delete a page, and how you can change the sequence of pages. From there, we'll move along to designing a file intake page. We'll focus on adding fields, moving and resizing fields and labels, setting field attributes, and deleting fields from a page. And finally, we'll focus upon managing actions in new file intake forms, and we'll focus on configuring actions for both basic and file type specific forms. And then, of course, towards the end of our session, if time permits, we'll get to answering any questions that we were not able to answer throughout the course of the session. Now first, let's do a little bit of an overview about customizing and designing new file intake forms. Now, as an Amicus administrator, you can create customized new file intake forms that are presented to your users when they're creating new files. Different forms can be assigned to specific file types, and individual fields can be marked as being required. Intake forms streamline the file creation or opening process and help to ensure that all necessary information is captured with minimal navigation being required to do so. New file intake forms are comprised of one or more intake pages and optionally a set of action items. There are two types of intake forms. They can apply to all new files regardless of the file type. This is the first type, and it's what we would refer to as a basic form. Or they can be designated for use when the new file is of a particular file type. This provides flexibility for including additional fields, including any custom fields that you've created and are using, and performing time of creation actions that may be required by a specific file type. This would be the second type, and this is what we would refer to as a file type specific form. Now, to access the new file intake management dialog, you must be logged into Amicus Attorney as an administrator. And just so you guys know, you must be an administrator to be able to access this particular area. So while regular users can take advantage of the new file intake forms that we've created, only administrators can actually manage and create those intake forms. And so, like I said, as an administrator, once we're logged into Amicus Attorney, well, we've got our navigation panel over here on the left with all of our different modules. And then, of course, all users will have this area up here in the upper left for home, preferences, reports, merge templates, and the help center, of course. But those of us that are administrators, well, we have this additional section here titled Administration over here on the left in our navigation panel. And this is where we'll find things such as user management, firm settings, security profiles, custom pages and records, new file intake management, and the import utility, as well as firm reports. Well, we're going to be focusing on this new file intake management, as you can see here. And so to show you how to access it, as an administrator, you would simply click on New File Intake Management here in the Administration section, like so. And in doing so, voila, the New File Intake Management dialog. Now, we're going to return back to here in just a little bit, but I want to add a little bit of levity to what we're going to be talking about. So let's talk about completing an intake form before we move along to the intangibles of it. An intake form is presented as a wizard with the ability to move next, that being forward, or back a page. The last page will offer the choice of either clicking Save and Close or Save and Open, to either save the file and open it for defined actions, if any, followed by further viewing and or editing. And one other thing to note, and I'm about to show you here, so let's go to the Files module, and let's just take a quick look at a basic file intake form. And I don't mean just a basic page, I just mean the default file intake form, if you will. So here in the Files module, we would go to the File folder icon here and click on New File. And in doing so, we are presented with our new file intake form. And so there's those options that I was speaking of, Save and Open, Save and Close. If I click Save and Open, once I've populated this information, it's going to save the file and have it open on screen in front of me. If I click on Save and Close, it's going to save the file, and it's just going to be appearing here in my list of files. It will not be open on screen in front of me. But the file will not be closed in the sense of closing the file, of course. So I always want to make sure that I make that differentiation, just to make sure that everybody's following along on the same wavelength here. And as I mentioned, you have the Save and Close and Save and Open options. Well, one thing I want to mention as well is that the Save and Close option is not available when an accounting link has been enabled, or if any actions have been defined on this file intake form. And so while we're here on the intake form, let's take a little bit of time to take a closer look at it, and this will help us in understanding the different types. So this that's presented to us right now is what we would refer to as a basic page for the file intake form. By default, this basic page is provided. And as you will see here, it contains the 5 default fields that have been shown in previous versions of Amicus Attorney when it comes to creating a new file. Those 5 default fields are the short file name, the primary client, the file type, and as you'll see, we've got a drop down here for that, the file billing category, also a drop down for that, and the file billing rate, a drop down here as well. Now, for the primary client, we simply click on the people selector here like so to select the primary client on the file, and here is where we actually give the short file name. Now, these fields cannot be deleted from this first basic page. Other core file fields, excluding custom fields, can be added to this page, and additional basic pages could be created if desired. So this was an example of a basic file intake page. Now I'm going to simply change the file type so I can show you guys an example of a file type specific form on the intake form. So I've selected civil litigation, and I want you to note right away that the buttons at the bottom have changed, and you'll see that I have a next option available for me. So allow me to give this a file name. So we'll just call this webinar test file. And let's select a primary client. We'll just select Ms. Janet Bailey here, like so. We're not going to go through the whole process of creating the file at this point. I simply want to show an example of the second type of page in a new file intake form before we go into the nitty-gritty of it all here. So clicking on the next button, now that I've populated my short file name, I've selected my primary client, I've selected my file type, my file billing category and my file billing rate have been selected here as well. So I will click next. And so here is an example of a file type specific page. Now, one or more file type specific pages may be configured. They will appear as part of the new file intake form workflow, as you can see here, following the first basic page, or following the basic pages if there's more than one. So for example, if at the time of opening a new file, a user selects the file type, in this case, civil litigation, on this first basic page, well then the civil litigation specific page or pages will appear after the last basic page. Well, this is the first and last basic page. We've made our selection for civil litigation, and clicking next presents us with that file type specific form. The designer may include both core and custom fields on these additional pages. Well, if we take a quick look at this, you'll see we've got a type of action drop down here with some choices in it. That one, because it's in red text and it is noted with an asterisk, we know that that is a required field. And of course, when we look back here on our first basic page, we'll note that all of these are required fields. And it will not allow us to proceed if we do not populate them all. To give you an example, let me remove Janet here. Watch what happens when I click Next. Please select the primary client for this new file. So that's just an example of an incomplete basic page and what would happen if I try to proceed. Now, of course, here on this one, given that that's a required field, I will have to make a selection here as I'm creating the file. These other fields, however, amount claimed, date action commenced, court name, court action number, and title of proceeding, well, these look to be custom fields that the user has created here, but none of these are required fields. I can tell because they're not in red font and there's no asterisk. So with that said, I could populate some of this information, but I don't necessarily have to be able to complete the process of opening the new file. But I do have to complete that selection. And of course, all the items on that first basic page. Now, just a couple of other things to add to this. Actions. Actions may be configured for the basic form and also for one or more file type specific forms. We'll get into actions a little more as we move along in our session, but to give you an idea of what those actions might be before we get along to them, they could be something like a conflict check. Could be generating a document or sending an email to a client, or it could be applying a precedent to the file as we create it. So those are just examples of what we're going to be able to do. And like I said, we're going to show that as we move along in our session. And one other thing before we move along here, printing forms. You may create a printable list of the fields and actions that are configured for a new file intake form. For the basic form, so let's take a quick look at that. So again, under Administration, we'll select New File Intake Management to bring up the New File Intake Management dialog here. So for the basic form, we would select the Basic Forms option up here at the top. And then you'll see there's an option for Print Selected. Now for a particular file type specific form, we would select the File Types option here. And again, we're going to go into a little more detail on all of this as we move along, folks. And then from there, we would select a file type, perhaps such as administrative law or civil litigation to follow up on the example we were using earlier here. And again, we can click on Print Selected to print that form out. So now let's move along to our discussion. We've finished the overview here, so let's now talk about managing pages in the new file intake forms. So, as I stated earlier, to configure pages for your new file intake forms, first you need to do the following. You must be logged into Amicus Attorney as an administrator, and I'll reiterate what I mentioned earlier at the beginning of our session, and that is that you must be an administrator within Amicus to manage or create new file intake forms. And of course, we navigate to the Office module. By default, when we first log into Amicus Attorney, we're taken to the Office module, but if we've changed our preferences, it might have us going somewhere else. So with that said, we want to navigate to the Office module using either the navigation panel here or the Go menu up here, or perhaps we do a right-click and select Office, or perhaps we use our system tray icon, right-click upon it, and select Office from there. No matter which way we take to get there, the end result is we'll be back here out at the Office module. And in the Administration section, we want to click on New File Intake Management, like so. And of course, as we've already seen a couple of times as we've been in here briefly so far, there is our New File Intake Management dialog. So now that we've got it open here, and we've already kind of seen it a couple of times, but now I'm going to get into a little more detail and tell you guys a little bit more about this dialog and show you some of the things that we can do within here. So the New File Intake Management dialog is where we can choose to create and or edit pages for basic or file type specific forms. To create and or edit basic forms and basic pages, well, we simply select the Modify the new file basic intakes forms used for all files radio button, so this guy up here. So again, this is to create and or edit basic forms and basic pages. This shows us the navigation list of the basic pages for the file intake form used by all file types. Now, to create and or edit file type specific forms and pages, we would select the Define New File Intake Forms for Individual File Types radio button here like so. And in doing so, the navigation list has changed to show us a list of pages grouped by file type, as you can see here. And you'll note that some file types do have a plus sign beside them to expand. Those are the ones where we'll already see that there are some new file intake forms that have been created. And of course, there's a summary list of its fields over here on the right. So for instance, if I select one of those file type specific forms, we'll take a look at the one under civil litigation here. This is that case details page we saw earlier when we took a look at it. There's the file type or file types that it is assigned to, and there is a list of the fields on the page. Now we may add a new page or select an existing page to edit, resequence, copy, delete, or add or remove file type assignments. We're going to discuss all of that and more in depth as we move along in this session. So let's first talk about how we would go about creating a blank new page. So to create a new empty file intake page, first we would select the type of page. Is it a basic or a file type specific? And then we would click on the New Intake Page button. So let's go through the process together here, just to show you guys. So for instance, if I've selected the new file intake, or the new file basic intake forms here like so, perhaps I go here like so, or perhaps I just want to create a new intake page. To do so, I simply click New Intake Page like so, and you'll see that I'm asked to give it a title. And then from there, I would click OK. Now, I just want to show you the differences in doing this for a file type specific form. So if I select that option, then let's select down here civil litigation, or let's pick one that doesn't have one already. So we'll take criminal, for instance. Let's select New Intake Page. And in this case, you'll see I'm presented with the same sort of prompt for the new intake page. It wants the page name, but you'll also notice that it's asking me for the file type or types. It's already got the one listed that I've selected, but I could add more by simply clicking the file folder icon like so, and perhaps I want to make criminal defense included in this as well, like so. So that's how we would go about creating a new page, either a basic or a file type specific, and we would simply click OK to complete this side of the process and move along. Now again, we're going to come back to this in a little bit, so I'm going to click cancel on here for the time being. And now I want to show you guys how we would go about creating a new page based on an existing one. So if we wanted to copy an existing file type specific page for use on another file type, we would select it in the management list. So for instance, we'll select case details here as an example. Let me see, what else do I have as an example here? Yeah, that might be a good example. So let's select the parties page here. Now all I need to do is click on the copy selected button here, like so. And you'll see I get this prompt. A new intake page will be created based on the current one selected. In the next dialog, enter the page name and assign the desired file type or types. So we'll say OK on that, and there we go. Or what I could have done is I could have opened up the page by selecting it and clicking the Edit button. I'm in the new file intake page designer dialog here now, and you'll see that I have a copy page option there as well. And if I click on that, you'll see that I get a similar prompt. New file intake page parties is about to be closed. Do you want to save the page? Well, I'll say yes on that. And then you'll see I'm getting that same prompt that we got earlier where I'd selected the page and clicked on copy selected. So again, at this point, we must specify the new page name and the file type or types that it will be associated with. Once completed, of course, we would click OK. Now, something important to note here, folks, is that only those custom fields that are defined for all assigned file types would be copied from the original page to the new page. So for instance, this custom field right here. Let's just do an edit on this. Sorry, that's a label. So my apologies. But if there was a custom field on here, then as long as it's available for the file type that we have selected for the copy, then it will be available for us. If it's not available for that particular file type, then it simply will not be included. But everything else that's on that page would. So do keep that in mind, folks. Now, if we wanted to edit an existing page, well, to edit an existing page, I've kind of already showed you how to do that, but I wasn't talking about it, so perhaps it was lost in the flow of everything else that we were doing. So if we wanted to edit an existing page, we would simply select it in the new file intake management dialog, like I've selected parties here, for instance, or you know what, we'll select a different one this time, again, just to show the entire workflow here. So we've selected case details under civil litigation here, and we click the edit button, like so. Up comes our file intake page designer dialog, and from here we'd be able to edit and add further design elements to our page. Now, we will be discussing more about editing the design and properties of a page further when we move along here in our session. So do bear with me on that front, folks. I'm just going to click cancel from here for the time being. Now, a couple other things we want to talk about here briefly before we move along to that portion of the presentation. Changing the page name or file type assignments of an existing page. So if we wanted to change the name of a page or the set of file types to which it has been assigned, we simply select the page in the new file intake management dialog. So again, we'll use our case details as an example here. I've already selected it. And we then click on the page properties button, as we can see here. There, I can see and edit the page name and the file type or file types that it is associated with. And of course, once I've completed my changes, I would click OK to save them. And something to note here as well, folks, is that a page may be assigned to only those file types for which all custom fields on that page have been defined. And a warning message would appear to notify you before removing any inappropriate file types from your list. Now, the last thing I want to quickly talk about before we move along to the designing side of things here is how we would go about deleting a page. Well, to delete a page, we simply need to select it in the New File Intake Management dialog, and then we would click on the Delete button. So let's create a copy of this one, just so that we can see how that all works. And again, this will show us the workflow of creating a copy of one as well. So I'm going to take that one there, the Parties page. We'll click on Copy Selected. And yeah, we'll call it Parties here again. And this time we will put it under Criminal. And so there now is that custom page, or sorry, that new file intake page, file type specific page, I should say, underneath the criminal file type. Now, if we wanted to delete a page, we simply select it here in the dialog, like I've done here, and we click the delete button right here, like so. And of course, there's the prompt that will proceed. Deleting the party's intake page will result in its permanent removal. It will not be available for use by any file type. Do you wish to proceed? I will say yes on that. And you'll note that the original has not been affected at all, only that one that I had selected. Now, if that page that we had deleted was assigned to more than one file type, we would be presented with the option of deleting it only for the currently selected file type or for all file types. So let's do that one more time. I'm going to do another example here. Let's make a copy of that. Okay, we'll call that. We'll just leave it as Parties, and we'll associate it to both Criminal as well as Criminal Defense. Say OK on that. So there it is there. And now watch what happens when we click the Delete button. This page is used by multiple file types. Do you wish to remove the page for the selected file type or delete the page from all file types? Let's do a delete. And so as you can see, it's been removed from both the criminal and criminal defense file type. And so that is deletion of pages. Now, the last thing I want to touch upon before we move along to the design side of things here, folks, is changing the sequence of pages. So let me find one here where I've got multiples. Okay, so it looks like this will be the best example here under corporate. So to change the sequence of pages, I would simply select a page on the left in the New File Intake Management dialog and then click on the Move Up or Move Down buttons accordingly to move the page to your desired location. And what we mean by this is where they're going to show up in the order of that New File Intake wizard that we saw at the beginning of our session, where we get the basic page where it asks us for the file name, the primary client, our billable status, and so forth. Once we've moved on to the next page, that's where we're getting into these pages and what order do we want them to show up in. Well, I could say that, you know what, let's have the corporate info show up first, so I could click on the Move Up button like so. Or, you know what, perhaps I do want to have parties showing up first, so I could click Move Down, and you'll see how it adjusts the order there. So that's how that is taken care of, folks. So now, let's move along to designing a file intake page. When you create or edit a page, the File Intake Page Designer dialog appears, as we see in front of us here, opening to that first basic page, which includes those 5 default fields at the top. So let's do all this again. So we would click on New File Intake Management, and of course there we are defaulting to that basic page, and there's the one it's referring to here. So let's open that up by clicking Edit, and there's the File Intake Page Designer dialog, and there you'll see those fields are. Short file name, primary client, file type, billing category, and file billing rate. Now, I want you guys to note here as well that if desired, there's a checkbox under here, for instance, where we can select it underneath the primary client to make that field a required field on the intake forms if the new file is billable. as you can see here. Now, we're going to talk about adding fields to a page. And I'm going to use this as the first example, and then we'll move along and take a look at a file type specific one as well. So this is a basic form. And to add a field to a page, we simply drag it from the list in the control panel on the left, as you can see here, and drop it on the desired position on the page over here on the right. Now for a basic page, you'll notice that the control panel only displays a list of the core fields, only. We don't have any other options available to us here on a basic page. So let me cancel out of here. And let's just do a new intake page here. We're going to do it underneath, we will just call this webinar test take page. And we will put this underneath criminal again. And so here is the designer dialog for a file type specific form. So again, there's those available core fields. But I want you guys to take note that for a file type specific page, the control panel does not only just display a list of the core fields, but there's a list of the available custom fields as well. Now, only those custom fields that are defined across all file types applicable to the page will show up here. So as I stated earlier, that first basic page contains the 5 default fields that we discussed earlier. We can add to that. So let me go out of here. I'm just going to cancel on that for the time being. Let's go back out to here. Even if we do a new, we'll just say this is webinar basic test. There is what it would look like. Let me cancel on that. And so let's just edit this one so that I can show you that you can add fields to this. So there's what we've already got, but perhaps we want to add a little bit more. So let's put a main note in here. Like so. Sorry, folks, I'm not sure why my mouse decided to stop responding there. But okay, I'm not going to fight with that anymore. But as you can see there, I've just added a main note field to that basic form. I would simply need to click Save and Close at this point. If I wanted to make that a required field, if I right-click and show field attributes, which we're going to talk about in a little bit further detail here momentarily, but you'll see there's a required field option, and I can make that true or false. So let me cancel on there. Let's go back out here. And like I said before, let's do a new intake page. We'll just call this webinar. And we'll make it for the criminal file type. And so just to kind of go back to what we were talking about, the first basic page contains those 5 default fields that we talked about earlier: the short file name, the primary client, the file type, the billing category, the file billing rate. And of course, like I said, and as we demonstrated, we can add additional fields to that page as that main note that we just did. Now we can add the same field on different pages of a file intake form. It will represent the same single data field across those pages. So if a user changes the information in the field on one of those pages, it's changing it on the other pages as well. So an example would be, let's say that we had the same main note field on 3 intake pages. On the first page, the user has entered some notes. On the second page, they've edited those notes. On the third page, those edits are going to be reflected in that main note field. Or if they deleted the notes on the second page, when we get to the third page, that note field would be empty, because again, it's the same data, simply across the same field across multiple pages. Now there is a text label field that's available here for adding headings or other general descriptions on the page as well. You'll see that one right here. So for instance, I could say, there's my custom page label, so let's just show field attributes, and we will give it some label text here. We will say that this is top area. Okay, and we'll just close that. So there you'll see that. I can move that around a little bit like so. So then we can add some fields. So perhaps we want to bring in, let's see, what do we have for custom fields? So here's a custom checkbox for the criminal file type. And let me see here. There's a custom list. And what I could do here is I can actually show the field attributes. So I would have to go into the actual custom field and so forth editor within the software here, and I could add some list items to that particular custom list. So we're just going to use some of these as examples here. And now we'll use that text label again. Put that down here. We even have a horizontal. Okay, so let me just put that here. Show field attributes. We'll call this bottom. Like so, and then we'll put some information down here, perhaps a file summary field. Again, I'm just putting some stuff in here so you guys can see how easy it is to add to these areas, and then how we would deal with it later. Okay, so I'm going to save and close on this. Now, just a couple of extra items here when we're talking about adding fields. Some fields might not be available depending upon your accounting system and link settings. So for instance, client ID and matter ID fields, if your accounting link is not set to use automatic numbering, those will not be available. If you exclude from the accounting link field, the exclude from accounting link field, if it's relevant to your accounting link, task-based billing and task-based billing code set fields, if your link is set to use task-based billing, then those will be available for you. Outside of that, they will not. And something else to note, if using the Move Data in Field feature to move data from one custom field to another, and don't worry if that's not something you're familiar with, folks, that's more on the side of custom pages and records and dealing with those. But again, I feel I'd be remiss if I did not mention this. But if using that Move Data in Field feature to move your data from one custom field to another, please do first ensure that none of the original or target custom fields are defined in any file intake pages at that time. So that's something to keep in mind from a house cleaning perspective. Now, one other thing I want to show you guys before we put all this into motion here, let's look back under criminal, and let's see, that one I didn't create, so we'll delete this guy here. So this is how we go deleting a page. Again, we'll just select it and delete there. Okay, and so there's my webinar test intake page. So let's edit that again. So by default, fields are assigned a label. And you guys saw me as I moved that over. For instance, we'll do it again. Let me see here for members assigned. So there's the label, there's the field. A field and its label are separate elements. You can move and resize one without the other. As you can see here, I can resize that, not affecting this. I can then select this, move it around, and again, I can resize it, not affecting that. Now to move a field or label, select it in the view and drag it to its new position, as you saw me doing there. To resize a field, we use those graphic handles as you saw me doing. Multiple fields and labels may be selected and then moved or resized together. So for instance, if I wanted to select multiples, I'd select the first one, hold the control key, select another one, and then select another one, and so forth. The default fields, so something to note here as well, the default fields on that first basic page, they cannot be rearranged or resized. So do keep that in mind as well, folks. Now, from a perspective of setting field attributes, to set the attributes of a field, you'll notice I did this earlier. You simply right-click on a field and select Show Field Attributes. In the Field Attributes dialog that appears, we may change the following. The tab index. This is the tabbing sequence of fields on a page. 1 means first, 2 is next, etc. And there's a required field drop down there, whether it's true or false. This forces users to enter a value for the field before continuing in that new file intake form. Now, 4 of the 5 default core fields on that basic page are set to be required, that being short file name, file type, the billing category, and the file billing rate. And if it's a billable file, well, then the primary client is required as well. And of course, if we wanted to delete a field from a page, we simply select it, and we can right-click and select the Delete Field button here, or we can simply press the Delete key on our keyboard. And of course, the following fields cannot be deleted from that first basic page, and that's those 5 fields: the short file name, the primary client, the file type, the billing category, and the file billing rate. Now, the last thing that I want to focus upon for you guys here, and before we do that, let's just do a very quick save and close on this. And that's managing actions in the new file intake forms. So actions may be configured for the basic form and also for one or more file type specific forms. The actions available are check conflicts. So while I'm doing this, let me show an example. So let's view the action items. So we've got the option to check conflicts. This opens the check conflicts dialog with the full name of the primary client automatically filled in. If you did not assign a primary client to the new file, this action does not need to be completed. We've got the apply precedent option. This opens the use precedent dialog in order to apply the specified precedent, creating a series of appropriate events on the file. We have an option to generate a document. This generates a single document based upon the document merge template that has been specified. And we've got the option to send an email. This will open a blank email message dialog that is based on the email merge template specified with the primary client's primary email address in the to field and the short file name in the subject field. So do note the following, please, folks. Actions are configured for an entire form, not for any particular page or pages of the form. Each action can be specified only once for a particular new file intake event sequence. For example, it is not possible to assign precedent A to the basic form and precedent B to a file type specific form, nor can precedents A and B both be assigned to a single form. If a particular action is selected on the basic form, it will be automatically selected on all file type specific forms. So for example, if the generate document action is selected on the basic form, it will appear in the new file wizard for all new files. This action cannot be excluded or changed for any specific file types. If the apply precedent, generate document, or generate email action is selected on any file type specific forms, that action cannot be changed from the basic form. And here's a tip for you guys as well. Regardless of whether the check conflicts action is selected on any file type specific forms, you can automatically clear that action from all file type specific forms by first selecting it on the basic form and then clearing it there. So how do we go about configuring actions on our file intake forms? Well, to do so, we must first navigate to the file intake management dialog like we are right now. For the basic form, we would select all file types up here. And then we would click on here, for instance. Let's just get rid of that one there. So here, I can select the page and click View Action Items. If I want to edit them, I simply click the Edit button, and then I check off the one that I want to use. So for instance, if I select Generate a Document to a client, you'll see I have those options there. So let's go down and do this. No. So let's go down here. We've selected the options for a file type specific form. Let's select our criminal one, view action items. We'll select our template here, like so. Let's save that. And we'll say OK. So now, let's see our example here. So let's go to Files. We've created that new file intake form, so let's create a new file that's of the criminal file type. Oh, we must select our primary client, so let's just do that. So there's that. I'm sorry, folks, just bear with me one moment. I will be right back with you. My apologies for the interruption there, ladies and gentlemen. Please do accept my most sincere apologies on that front. So, as I was stating here, this is our new file intake form that we created. And so I want you guys to watch what happens when I click on the Save and Open option, because we did add an action to this. So let's see what it does for us. And so as you'll see, I'm now being prompted to generate that document. But it is not a required step. So I could click on the Generate Document button to complete the process, or I could simply click Close to not do so. So let's just do that. We'll click on the Generate Document button. Again, not required. We could have made it a requirement. And there's our document. I'm just going to click Cancel on here. I don't necessarily want to save it. I just wanted, again, you guys to see the workflow involved here. So again, I'll select Don't Save, and we can close on that. And there's our new file details dialog there. So that, folks, is an example of what we can do with these file intake forms and how we can implement them for use when we create new files. And we can do all kinds of things, such as having actions established to them, such as generating a document, or we could have applied a precedent, we could have had it generate an email, and so forth. So those are all the different sorts of things that we've got available for us to be able to do within here. Now, does anybody have any questions at all on what we've demonstrated and discussed during today's webinar? All right, then. Well, one last thing here before we wrap up today, folks, and that's that Abacus Maximus is coming up at the end of this month, June 24th through June 26th at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada. We will have a whole bevy of guest speakers, such as Aaron Brockovich as one example. We will also have all of our product training staff there as well. So myself, Scott, all of us that do these webinars and the training. So Brandon over in Office Tools and Shante. You'll have Scott for Abacus. You will have Seth here from Hot Docs. So we will have everybody in one or under one roof essentially, and there'll be presentations throughout the day so that you guys can join in on some of our sessions geared towards the different products such as Amicus Attorney, Abacus Law, Office Tools, and so forth, Hot Docs as well. And as well, you can take advantage of enjoying those guest speakers that we have available as well. Now, for those of you who have not already registered, please do go to visit abacusmaximus.com to get an idea of what all is involved and what's going on there. And for those of you that do wish to register, well, please do use the discount code WEBINAR at the time of ordering your tickets, and you'll get $100 off. And so it looks like we have reached the end of our session for today, folks. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for taking the time out of their busy schedules to attend and participate in today's Abacus Next Free Training Tuesdays Amicus Attorney New File Intake Management session. I do hope to see you guys back here on Thursday of this week, that's June the 6th, at 3:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we will be doing another Amicus Attorney webinar, and that's Free Training Thursdays webinar on APX, Abacus Payment Exchange, within Amicus Attorney. So I do hope to see you all on that as well. And again, thank you all for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your day, week, and weekend to come.